Well, welcome back. We are, of course, still Ripples, and this is Skipping Stones. We're continuing where we left off in the previous video, and we've been going over the three kind of basic worldviews that have been boiled down, and the four key points that any religious view, or I should say worldview, has to answer. And we've started with origins. That's basically where everything begins. And today, or tonight, or whenever you're watching this, we're going to move into meaning. And Brian, what does, meaning mean?
Well, basically, what we're going to do is break meaning down into two things, purpose and value. But meaning is something in reference to value. It means that something has worth, that there's something that that's special in a way about whatever you're talking about. I mean, money has value. All these different things have some sort of value to them. But what is the value of a human being? What gives us value? And in reference to purpose, that deals with, is there a duty, is there a responsibility that you have as a human being?
You know, this is a question that's plagued mankind for quite some time. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? And tonight we're not going to go super deep philosophically like that, but we're going to take a look at Christianity. What's the purpose and value put on us from a Christian point of view? Same thing, what's the value and purpose put on through a atheistic view and a pantheistic view? Brian, why don't you start us out with the atheistic view of what the meaning is?
Well, in reference to atheism, the belief system is tied up into subjectivity, basically. So, I mean, in reference to value, it's subjective. In reference to purpose, it's subjective. So, someone may view themselves as more valuable than, let's say, the human being right next to them, or they may look at, like, let's say, a movie star, or they look at the president, or something like that, and they say, that person has more value to me. Because they have a higher purpose, or something like that. It's all subjective. There's no standard. The standard that you have, basically, is what you judge by, or what someone else judges by. That's more of a kind of an atheistic view of that. But
well, and with the atheistic view, a lot of times that can be broken down into different things. If you have a lot of possessions, then you have a great amount of value. If you help a lot of people in certain views of it, then you hold a great deal of value. And it's a liquid form as far as value goes. It's something that's always changing. It's not set one way or another.
Well, it's very works-based too.
Exactly.
I mean, you would look at you could look at a human being that, let's say, they're not working, and you'd say, or like, let's say it's someone that's homeless or whatever. And an atheistic worldview would say, well, that person isn't fulfilling their higher purpose of whatever it may be that they have a view of them, and they'll say, well, that's less of a human being. That's less than this human being over here. In reference to value, as far as purpose, they'll say, well, they're not fulfilling their purpose, and then they attribute that to value. It's all tied up in works. It's all tied up into wealth, different things. But it's very materialistic. It's very subjective. It's very based upon you yourself and what you do in this life.
The atheistic view is more tangible. It's more physical. It's kind of, if I can see it, I can touch it, it exists. And that's where you get into the value of, like Brian was mentioning, the physical attributes that somebody has. Well, you can do this, I can do that, so on and so forth, is what we equate the value as far as the atheistic view goes.
Exactly.
What about the pantheistic view? Well,
the pantheistic view, again, is works-based, but there's some aspect of spirituality in there, specifically in reference to karma. You would have a scale, like a karmatic scale or whatever, and some people are on this end, the lower end. Some people are considered, of a higher reincarnated being or whatever. And so again, it's works based, but then it's works based with the inclusion of some sort of divine or spiritual aspect.
Yeah. So ultimately, with the pantheistic view, you get the pros and cons of history. The longer that you're doing it, the better you should be, hypothetically. So somebody that's really high on the karma chart has learned throughout all their many lives or views that, this is where it's at. Another pantheistic view that's out there is that you have no value at all. I mean, it's very self-defeating in that, you're only here for a moment, and then you vanish. That's it. And that even kind of goes into the atheistic view a little bit too.
Slightly, yeah. It kind of goes into a little bit of Buddhism. In some of their beliefs, there is no self. If there's no self, then how do you equate value of a human being or whatever? Well, they say, well, there's no self, though. But the reality of it is, yeah, I mean, there is some aspects of subjectivity, but some people view that as very fair in a way, because they're like, well, it's whatever you do in this life, then that's what's subtracted or added to your, account. Or whatever.
So, finishing it off, the last view is the Christian view. Okay, so what about the Christian's view of meaning?
Well, in the Christian's view of meaning, there, of course, God's present, but you ask yourself, well, what is our meaning? Where does that come from? Let's start with value. Where does value come from? We see value in at least two places in Scripture I'd like to point out. Number one is in Genesis, where it says that, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but you skip over to chapter 2 where it talks about mankind. We see that man was created in the image and likeness of God. I mean, no other creature is that mentioned about. No other being, no other thing is that mentioned about in Scripture. That for man to be created in that way, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and the creatures of the sea and of the air and of the field were created after their own likeness.
Exactly.
But man was created in the image of God, and that gives a great deal of value.
Exactly.
That we were created individually versus in kind of a mass quantity.
Yeah. I mean, you started with Adam and Eve. Also, the second part that I think adds value to a human being, of course, is the crucifixion of Christ, the death and resurrection of Christ. Again, I mean, first you have a creator that creates a being, mankind, in his likeness, in his image. I mean, right there, that gives value to every human being. But the mere fact that God, yet again, sends his only son, basically taking his son and saying, you know what? You are worth this life. I mean, you are worth the life of my son. I love you that much. Okay, so you have creation, and now you have love being placed in there as well and given to mankind, like that grace shown to mankind. Again, that gives value.
Yeah, and we've said this many times in our podcast, and you're going to hear it a lot of times in the video. See, God places a greater value on us than at times we place on ourselves.
Exactly.
This world will drag you down and pull your value down. It doesn't devalue you. It makes you believe that you're worth less than what you really are. As Brian mentioned, Jesus Christ paid that ultimate sacrifice. So there has to be some value to our lives in order for God to be willing to pay this price. And with the other views, it's all based on the monetary system. How good are you? How much work have you done? Christianity's value system is based on the relationship you have with Christ. For it's not by works that we are saved, but by
grace.
By grace. And so that's one of the biggest things that sets Christianity apart.
Yeah. Well, grace by definition basically is unmerited favor. All right. Moving on just slightly, purpose. Scripture also shows us that man does have a purpose. In the beginning, we see that man was given dominion over all the creatures of the land. Basically, he was to be steward over all of God's creation. Also, we see that man is to fellowship with God and is to worship.
Yeah, and so kind of on a closing point here, the value and purpose that we have is actually given through God. It's through God that we find value. It's through God that we find purpose. And that's really what sets Christianity apart from them.
Exactly. I mean, it's not subjective.
Yeah.
And it's given by God. So it's objective. No matter what we do, that value is still there. No matter what we do, that purpose is still there.
So, that concludes this episode. Tune into the next one where we continue this moral dilemma.